Hello and welcome back to the Cypar podcast, where we're shaping ideas and informing change. My name is Maria and I am your host. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the Zambian Democratic Governance Project run by SAIPAR. Before we get into the meat of it, I'd like to share a bit more about SAIPAR. SAIPAR is a non-governmental, not-for-profit, interdisciplinary research center which focuses on research in the areas of law and justice, economics and development, as well as politics and social change. Today, I'm joined by Caesar, one of the directors here at SAIPAR, and he'll be sharing a bit more about what SAIPAR does, as well as sharing information about the Zambian Democratic Governance Project, also known as the ZDG Project. Welcome, Caesar.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Please give the viewers, the listeners, a bit of information about SAIPAR.
Sure. Like you said, CYPAR is a non-profit organization. We do policy analysis research. We do a lot of activities that sort of bridge gaps between what academic institutions do and what the industry requires or does in terms of absorbing people from academia, particularly students. We run a lot of exchange programs and bridging programs, training, capacity building is part of what we do, along with the core work of doing research and analysis, mainly in three areas, political science, economics, and law. And the reason is pretty simple, because those are the three pillars of activity around any economy and society. You have the law on one side, you have the politics on the other side, and you have economics on the other side. These are the three things that surround any society. So CYPAR thought it wise to, in a multidisciplinary way, focus on all three of those areas. So pretty much that's what we do. We work independently on many of our projects, but also build collaborations with different types of partners. So you have your multilateral institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, and others, UN bodies. And then you have your bilaterals, like FCD or GIZ, the agencies that are serving individual countries, formerly USAID and so on. And then you have NGOs, local and international NGOs. We have a number of partnerships with academic institutions abroad, in South Africa, in the US, in the UK, and other think tanks around the region, in Zimbabwe, again, South Africa, and so on. So we have quite a diverse range of partners. And pretty much, I must hasten to say the government is also a significant partner now, based on the way we've grown organically as an organization. The government has come to the fore to appreciate CYPAR's input, CYPAR's intellectual heavy lifting that we are able to do and things like that. And we've become a trusted partner. And I guess we'll get into the ZDG project, the Zambia Democratic Governance Project. And that's a clear demonstration of where we have partnered in a significant way with the government as a key partner or key client of ours. But in a nutshell, very well-rounded, very multidisciplinary, growing organically. We prize ourselves in being independent in our thoughts, in our actions, in our ability to choose projects that align with our ethos, with our spirit. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that brilliant explanation of what SAIPAR does. And then I think we can now get into ZDG, the Zambian Democratic Governance Project.
Sure.
Can you just give us a background of how it came into being, and then I think we can go from there?
Yeah, sure. The ZDG project came into being last year, 2024. It was mobilized quite rapidly. The backstory is in 2023, the Ford Foundation in the US was looking for a local partner in Zambia to help them run some democratic forum. They didn't find a partner. in 2023. And fortunately, I have a friend in Dr. Chola Milabo, the permanent representative to the UN, Zambia's permanent representative to the UN. So he's an ambassador there. And when he heard about Ford Foundation looking for partners and having failed in 2023 to find someone, he said, well, look, I know a guy. And he sits at SAIPAR, and I think SAIPAR is a great institution to take your project to. So come 2024, they had ramped up from the $300,000 that they had, and they were looking for an institution that could credibly put a proposal to absorb $1 million. That was probably one of the largest projects that SAIPAR was entrusted with. So we got down with the rest of management and put together a bankable proposal. And that was in the early part of 2024. I think Ford Foundation must have approached us around, probably around March. No, around February. Then around April, we put together the proposal, submitted it. They were quiet for a little bit. And then in July, they told us that they had approved the project as of May. So we had lost a little bit of time there. So they said, well, for us, the clock started ticking as soon as our board approved, and sorry that we didn't tell you.
Yeah.
So we normalized things here through the board, and long story short, once we got the board approval internally, we hit the ground running and started to set up all the nuts and bolts that we needed to finally lock in to get the program or the project going.
Okay, that sounds very interesting. And then what is ZDG? What did it end up being?
So ZDG is mainly a public sector capacity building project, meaning that the only sort of soft condition that Ford Foundation gave us for the $1 million was to be apolitical. So divorce ourselves from the politics, and within that space, find a way of supporting the building of capacities in economic governance. So in the period between February and April, when we were putting together the proposal, our homework was to go around the government institutions, identifying which were the apex economic institutions of government. So we went to Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as you'd imagine, local government and rural development, and the list goes on, right? Speaking to the main pillars of the Zambian economy, particularly in the 8th National Development Plan. Eventually, we had agreements in principle, nothing on paper, that we had broadly 4 pockets that we could work with. That was Ministry of Finance, Foreign Affairs, local government, and then a loose agreement with Ministry of Agriculture, together with ZDA, the Zambia Development Agency. And the rationale again was pretty much these were the institutions that were responsible for the economic governance side of things. So especially when you think about including international relations and things like that, and including trade, investment, science and technology transfers and things like that, those were among them. We didn't have carte blanche to and sufficient capacity within Cypar to cut across the whole of government. Mm-hmm. There are many institutions that are within that pocket that you would call economic governance institutions, but we couldn't reach all of them because, of course, we had a limited pool of human resource to type of the project, and the money was also limited. You might think $1 million is a lot, but when you start to divvy it up among these competing demands that we were defining, it ends up being a manageable amount that you can absorb. We had an experimental part to it that we then called Groundwater development as a project. That was pretty much an experiment, and it was responding to the president's call to figure out, on his radar, the 3 points of insecurity that he was seeing at the presidency level was food security in agriculture, energy security, and water security. And water security is very important because it cuts across. It also has implications for energy because most of our power is hydropower. It also has an implication for agriculture and pretty much for rural and urban development because, as they say, water is life, right?
Yes.
So how do you harness groundwater, water that's not on the surface, that is underground and you cannot see? So our question was to see, there are reports, anecdotal, that Zambia has significant deposits of water. We invested a lot of time, talent, money in understanding the mineral resources that are underground, but not the water resources. And yet people say water is life. So we thought we could buy into the president's vision around that and see what we could contribute in water. So very specifically, the 6 areas of the ZDG project, one was capacity building for the Ministry of Finance around macroeconomic modeling. The second was around capacity building, including policy development for Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so economic diplomacy issues. Third was a partnership with local government or the Ministry of Local Government around youth empowerment and how to get the CDF more actively going. Number 4 was farm blocks, a program that has not taken off as the government had intended. This program was established in 2002, and very few farm blocks have properly been operationalized. So Cypar's question is, how can we contribute to operationalization of at least one farm block through a detailed diagnostic study? Then, like I was saying a moment ago, the 5th element was around groundwater harnessing, and we were meant to work through local councils. So it's varying the model around, instead of using a top-down approach, we were trying to use a bottom-up approach in terms of connecting with a few selected councils. Then the 6th element was a project implementation unit that coordinates and oversees the other 5 technical components. So pretty much that is ZDG.
And in relation to all of the projects or all of the components of the ZDG project, what would you say are the main lessons learned from each one? So for the macro modeling in relation to the Ministry of Finance, what are the key takeaways from that specific one?
Okay, I think for me, the big pictures are, it's not always that easy to work with the government, but it can be done. And once you win over the government, I think they are a very reliable and responsive partner once you win them in. And one of the great successes of the project is that we locked in 4 memorandums of understanding. One with finance, signed by the Minister of Finance himself, one with foreign affairs, one with local government, and a final one with Zambia Development Agency, ZDA. These MOUs outlive the project, meaning that they are still in effect now, even if we are winding down and closing off the ZDG project. Meaning that for SAIPAR, they have created a lasting relationship with the government ministries and the government agency. And there's a huge interest now to continue leveraging on what the project has created and creating new work strands, new relationships. Ministry of Finance is keen for the capacity building trainings that we put together to continue and to be escalated to other ministries within government that have economic functions, because they found those trainings that useful for them. So they are willing to help us with resource mobilization towards actualization of these project components or work streams. Point being really that while it can be challenging at the start to win over the government to sign those MOUs, once the MOUs are locked in, once the partnerships and the trust are built, it's quite rewarding in the sense that the government is a very professional and very committed player on the other side. And for me, that was heartwarming. In terms of progress with the different components, they moved at different paces and at different levels of success. If you look at the training of the Ministry of Finance, it delivered at parity. So 100% of what was committed when we started was delivered in terms of the training, the building of the models, installing software in the ministry and in Cypar, providing some level of software and hardware to both parties and things like that, establishing a viable relationship through the MOU. All those boxes were ticked. I think we did one better because we built internal capacity in Cypar to be able to deliver the trainings, as opposed to relying on consultants coming from outside Cypar to help us deliver the training. So the building of the training material and the delivery of the training was all done in-house. So that's another proud moment for Cypar. For the economic diplomacy with foreign affairs, I think we overperformed significantly on that one.
That's lovely to hear.
Yes. We were supposed to deliver about 4 outputs when we started. That was ramped up to 5 midstream, and the outputs were significantly changed. We ended up delivering 7 or 8 outputs. And those were very relevant to the ministry. Again, the ministry has come and said, is there a way for Cypar to continue this sort of collaboration and helping us to build our capacities in economic diplomacy, to improve our ability to negotiate with bilateral and multilateral partners, to find spaces, roles, responsibilities in these forums and institutions, and to build the confidence and abilities of staff in the ministry to be able to navigate these sometimes difficult waters. And the practical example is when you go for some of these negotiations, let's say trade negotiations or bilateral negotiations for international cooperation, you might find the Zambian delegation has 2 or 3 officers, including the permanent secretary. So 2 technical officers and 1 high-level government official. On the other side of the table, you find they are negotiating with a delegation of maybe 15 people. And each of them very specialized in one area. So you are talking to 15 highly specialized people. And the negotiation, just from that perspective, is unfair. So how do you build capacity for very lean teams of negotiators to be able to interface with big panels of very specialized people? That capacity can be built, and especially now with the advent of technology, AI, and other digital technologies and things like that, it can be built. But you have to put your skin in the game, as they say. You have to, figure out how you will leverage on the technology, on the skills built within your local economy to see how you embed this capacity, this extra capacity within a ministry. Cutting to the YES initiative. So this was Youth Empowerment Support Initiative. That one performed again almost at par, slightly under par because some of the parameters of the project had to be changed, but mainly this was a budget consideration. I mean, if you remember, when we started the project, we had $1 million. And we kept that money in dollars and pegged it at about, it was around 27 million kwacha. But then as we started to implement, the kwacha gained strength. So it went from 27 million to 23 million.
That was a big jump.
And that was a big reduction in our budget. So with that reduction in the budget, some projects had to take a pay cut. And Youth Initiative had a lot of components that required fieldwork and things like that. So we had to scale down on that and scale down on the ambitions. And instead of going to 10 districts, I think they scaled down to 8 districts. But pretty much within those districts, the whole experiment of strengthening the systems for youth participation in the Constituency Development Fund, CDF, those components were achieved. Then the Solwezi farm law, the original idea was to just do one diagnostic study. When we reorganized ourselves, we ended up doing actually 11 components that built up into one consolidated diagnostic study. So again, a significant overachievement. We have delivered this to ZDA, Ministry of Agriculture, and the World Bank, which are all interested in this space called farm blocks. Groundwater, again, was at parity, an experimental design from the start, and which kept changing the experiment. And the main reason for the change is the data that we anticipated on that project was not forthcoming the way we thought. Spatial data, as they call it, or geographic data of high resolution requires that there's an agency that picks up that data with the right frequency and at the right resolution. When we were starting the project, we thought WAMA, the Water Authority, they have the mandate, but we thought they had the technology and the capacity to do this as a routine, and they were taking this as administrative data. Once we got into the works, we found out that there is no agency in Zambia that actually has the capacity, the resource backing to do this on a routine basis. So there's still a significant gap in terms of data for groundwater. It's very different from minerals because there's right now a geospatial mapping of mineral resources. And I think the opportunity was lost because that same geospatial mapping could have also been used to map groundwater precisely. Yeah.
I'll give you a moment to breathe.
I used to teach at the university,
so
I can go
you can do this.
Yeah.
I think my next question is on the challenges faced during the implementation. I think the first one that you mentioned was related to finances and how the Kwacha gain affected the money that we had access to. Any other challenges faced? I know you mentioned government also has, it was a bit difficult to establish some of the connections there, but once they were there, they were solid. Anything else other than those?
Yeah, those were the big two. There were other challenges. For example, for some, it was a journey of discovery, right? You start thinking that you have the right pool of human resource in a particular project. And as you start to finalize the design and do the implementation, you realize that there are significant gaps that might be there on the human resource side, and you have to augment them and so on. Other challenges are simply things like a consultant bailing out on you, and you have to pick up the pieces, such as what happened with the Ministry of Finance work around macroeconomic modeling. The consultant that was hired to do the work changed what he saw as the terms of reference and wanted to introduce his own terms of reference to the table. And we were not agreeable because those were different expectations than what we had set with the ministry. So rather than compromise on toning down the terms of reference, we said we would internalize. So that was an unanticipated thing. It was a challenge for us, but we mitigated it by looking internally and saying, well, don't we have the capacity, the competences in-house to run that program? So across, there were a number of similar examples where, some projects even had an overstock on human resource. They had overplanned, and then they had to scale down and things like that. But by far the biggest two were the inertia at the start, in terms of building relationships with the government, and then we were on the clock. I mentioned earlier on we had a late start. We lost maybe 2 months between May and July in terms of starting, and we were also a bit wrong-footed when we started because we didn't know that this was coming, and we were not doing any sort of preparatory work. In fact, we thought, okay, maybe we were over-ambitious. No one would trust us with $1 million. So when it came, it had to be, that's when we started now mobilizing the board and getting permission to have an ad hoc committee for the board, putting together the PIU and things like that, because these structures had to be paid for. So we couldn't put those structures online within Cypar without getting some kind of approval for the foundation that the project was going ahead. So there was initial time that was lost, but by I think August, September, we were on point. Our overall project implementation implementation plan had been approved by the board, and we were starting implementation. But even then, now you had to galvanize all the teams and say, look, remember you were on standby? Well, the funding is in, we need you now. And some people had been lost to attrition, You don't have people just sit, especially talented people. They just don't sit idle waiting for your project to actualize. So we lost some people, had to replace a few people on the different project components. But all in all, we had the sort of strategic thinking and flexibility from both management and the board to call it like we saw it. So when we experienced challenges, there was a lot of flexibility as well as discretion given to me as the director of the project to really be innovative and flexible around how I reposition the project.
Okay. I mean, if I was to condense everything you said, I'm hearing there was a lot of policy analysis, driving progress for the benefit of people. Is that accurate?
Yes, for the benefit of people and
yes,
the government
and
SAIPAR.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned earlier use of AI and digital technologies. How important was that? I understand it was used in the groundwater component as well as the farm block component when it came to mapping of crops.
Yes.
And how important was digital technology in attaining the goals of each of the components?
Sure. I would answer that question this way. I think there's great potential for digital technologies, particularly data-driven technologies like artificial intelligence, or they call them large language modeling techniques, LLMs. There's great potential, but you have to remember that these are data-driven. So they depend on the data that you load on them. And that is where we have a challenge, is that in Zambia, in many parts of Africa, we don't invest so much in generating our own data. And I'll give you an example of geospatial data. It's, let's say, it's more precise the lower you can drill down. So if you are going per square kilometer, so the resolution is a little bit blurred, right? And if you go down to per square meter, then you are getting more precise. So you're talking about within the space that we are occupying, the two of us, what is happening within this space geographically. You have your bottle of water, your glass of water, I have mine. We have the tablet here, we have two individuals. There's a lot more precision. Then when you go up to a square kilometer, there's much less precision on the data, because now it's difficult for you to count how many people do you have in that square kilometer and things like that. So the more precise your data is, the better it is for these AI models to be able to tell a story, to be able to do the analysis that they need to do. We haven't invested in that nuanced or granular data. And so what we rely on is typically models that are loaded with data that was collected by Western entities, right? They might not have an interest to look into Africa the way you do. So, for example, for the groundwater, we were using data that I think was coming from NASA and other places, but it was at a very high level of resolution. And we needed it more frequently collected than when the NASA satellites pass overhead Zambia and collect that data once off. So it was pretty much a data issue that we saw as a learning point, that probably for the AI potential to be actualized, you would need a lot more investment, public and private, in data systems that we can use to galvanize the data, collect the data, and then harness the data, load it up onto these models. Again, for the groundwater, in fact, for both of them, groundwater and farm blocks diagnostics, there was no bespoke, plug and play model that you could pick up off the shelf the way you get ChatGPT or other models, Gemini and so on, that you can just say, okay, I have a model that I can just basically command because it's already preloaded with data and things like that. So we had to build the models bespoke from the ground up. And this was the same thing for both of them. For the groundwater, I think we ran out of time to completely operationalize the model because we just didn't have the data that we could use to train the models. For the diagnostic study around farm blocks, we used a slightly different approach. And long story short, we were able to develop a viable model that can be used to do the suitability of different crops and different pastures for livestock. So that was a success, but we've only just started scratching the surface. There's a lot more in terms of potential. There's a lot more that could be done. Of course, if we are to carry any of these work strands forward, we need to have both the internal interest and capacity in Cypar to carry them along, as well as the resourcing, which typically comes externally, right? From Ford Foundation or others, now that the seed has been planted by Ford Foundation, from other organizations. I know in parallel to the ZDG, we also had the Irish Aid project. That was very important for even catalyzing the mobilization of Ford Foundation. We were able to do this because the institutional restructuring that Ford Foundation coincidentally required was already ongoing.
Oh,
that is why we
supported by the Irish.
Yes, supported by the Irish. That is why we were able to very quickly respond to Ford Foundation within 2 months. It took them as long to respond to us and say they had approved our proposal, as it took for us to put together the whole machinery, technical, institutional, and things like that. But that was because a heavy hand up was given by the Irish project in terms of institutional capacity building. So putting in place systems for procurement, finance, and so on, redefining Cypar as it was registered as a profit-making organization, though in practice it was a non-profit organization with PACRA. So we had to change around that structure and register Cypar as an institution by guarantee. So incorporated by guarantee, and so we had the directors being the guarantors and things like that. All that is to say that we had great synergies with other projects that really helped to actualize the ZDG project. And taking it forward, we would still look to other projects and other partners or partnerships to come on board and pick up the pieces. I see potential through the Ministry of Finance project to continue with that sort of training. I know the likes of Africa Development Bank tend to support things like these capacity building arrangements. And I think the issue is now to just get our head down, do more proposal writing, and see what we could put in the pipeline to keep many of these project components. In my view, all 5 of the project components do not have the work 100% done. They have planted the seed. Now the seed needs to grow and mature into a tree that then yields the fruit that we're looking for. So the training, the capacity buildings, if you look across the board, even the YES initiative, it just scratched the surface. If you're talking about 8 constituencies out of 156 constituencies, if you have proof of concept, how do you scale to the rest of the 148 constituencies that were not touched by the YES initiative? You know, things like that is now what we need to figure out how to reorganize ourselves, both internally in Cypar and externally together with our partners, around how do we make progress. I think there's scope to also bring in a lot of other components in a setting like this. You mentioned AI. There's a lot of interest right now in figuring out how AI can be harnessed and leveraged to work for countries like Zambia. Cypar has a wider mandate than just Zambia. The Southern Africa Institute for Policy and Research. So how do we expand our reach beyond Zambia and start thinking about installing similar projects in other countries within the SADC region, for example? How do we work with SADC Secretariat and COMESA Secretariat to start having a more regional feel to some of the things that we've done and proven concept on within the Zambian borders? Yeah.
Going back to the conversation about government and how it's a bit difficult to establish the connection at first, why do you think that's the case? And are there any solutions that we could try to put in place going forward?
About solutions, I'm not sure. The issue is government is a very rigid, very bureaucratic, red tape institution. So for you to win them over, you have to go through sort of the hierarchy. So you have to find a way of convincing people at the technical level, and they say, yes, we buy into your idea, but remember we answer to certain principles, including ministers. So is this part of the sort of current minister's vision or thinking? And typically government officers are not able to carry your message up to their principles. So if you have talked to a director or you talked to a PS, those are the technical people. And if they are not 100% convinced, or they haven't understood your concept to the level of detail that you do, they can't sell it like you do. They would try to find a way, or require you to find a way of connecting directly with their principals, the ministers. So you have to find that the tact to be able to do that. And it can be bureaucratic. You have to fit yourself into the minister's calendar and things like that. Make your pitch when you are able to and things like that. So it also ends up depending a lot on the informal networks that you have, right? With different ministries, with different agencies, with State House, for example. If you have a relationship with the economic advisor who also is affiliated to Cypar, you can use her and say, can you whisper into the minister's ear that there's this thing that is in their offing and is of interest to the presidency, because the president has pronounced a particular vision around these things. So you use those tactics to try and make progress. But the big challenge is really that you are facing a very bureaucratic, very rigid institution in government, a very rigid machinery it works on red tape a lot. It's proliferated with red tape. That is the big challenge. Other than through formal and informal reforms, it's very difficult to see how you would change that. I was quite impressed at a recent event that I attended where the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Agriculture were both in attendance. So government protocol is that the permanent secretary in the particular ministry will be given the floor to then invite the minister. And the two ministers just decided we are breaking this protocol, we're wasting time by doing this. So MC, when it's your turn, just call the ministers. And the MC, very quick study, he did one better of them on them, because once the Minister of Agriculture finished his intervention, the MC said, well, you have the floor, maybe invite your counterpart, you know, so let's save time that way instead of me coming to the podium. He just said, no, Honorable Minister, you just invite the next speaker, who's the Minister of Finance. And they did that transition seamlessly. So they probably saved 3-5 minutes, because the PS for Finance didn't have to come and then introduce his minister as well and things like that. The Minister of Agri did not need his PS coming on board. So that was informal. So informally you can do that, but you can also do that as organized reforms. So public sector reforms that change the way the government does business and keeps it open. I've never figured it out why you have to stand when ministers who are publicly elected come into a room. I think, you know, they are the highest level of civil servant. So why does everybody else have to stand when they come into a room? And again, that protocol, it takes time for you. Oh, the minister is coming now. Can we be upstanding? And then He walks into the room and then you have to wait for the minister. Why can't the minister just walk in like everybody else and then everybody takes their seats, you go with the proceedings? That sort of reform is necessary. The protocols around how you engage with the government and how you formalize things, it could be streamlined. If you look at farm blocks, for example, going back to the conversation that we had, one of the discoveries was that the land that is for farm blocks has recently been redesignated. It's no longer going to be under Ministry of Agriculture. It's going to be under IDC, the Industrial Development Corporation. And this was a presidential directive because under Ministry of Agriculture, together with lands, they were ceding off the land, right? So you give it on a long lease to a private investor. Now the government has changed the way it does business and says, no, this is an asset for the Zambian people. So the government will hold on to the land and add it as its equity contribution to any project around farm blocks. So this is a journey of learning. And that reform happens when you have sort of knowledge, but also when you have leadership that is willing to take on the reforms, right? So it's an ongoing process, but it's a process that has to happen for government to be able to change the way it does business and to be more efficient at its ability to do business.
You mentioned MOUs that are still ongoing with the different ministries and different entities that are affiliated to the state. What happens in the event that there's a regime change or for whatever reason, there's, I guess a regime change would probably be the biggest event at this point.
Yeah, sure. I mean, MOUs are as typical MOUs would be. The MOUs that Cypar is holding are very generic, right? And they are institutional. They are very objective in that they are identifying needs of a government machinery. And they are, as I said towards the start, apolitical. That was one of the conditions of Ford Foundation. And now you can see the wisdom is that you divorce yourself from the politics, even in the way you structure the MOUs. They identify needs that are ongoing for the ministries, and the ministries are able to buy into them from a very objective technical point of view. So from that point of view, they are relatively secure. Mm-hmm. But, as the Bible says, a Pharaoh that knows not Joseph could come along. And an MOU is an agreement that is a relatively loose agreement. It's not legally binding. So they can unwrite them. And every MOU has exit clauses. So if despite the objectivity, despite the technical soundness of the MOUs, if a particular ministry or agency feels that it is no longer worth its while, there are exit provisions, and Cypar can take its business or its service elsewhere. I think within government, even outside government, with the way we have profiled ourselves now, having been able to, within the time allocated to us, absorb $1 million. I would say, playing in the big league now. Mm-hmm. Because even for international think tanks, when they heard that Cypar is trying to absorb $1 million within 18 months, they thought it was a tall order, and yet we've pulled it off, right? So we've built significant capacity within Cypar to be able to do this. We do the ideation, once the idea is maturing, we do the planning, mobilizing talent. I think that's the most critical component, more than the money, is finding the right talent that can actually deliver, the right talent that has the right attitude in terms of commitment and availability, right? So we are able to use our networks to get people to buy into the Cypar vision. Now that we have planted this $1 million seed, sky is the limit. And we are right now thinking about pipeline projects that we could put together. And to be truthful, we're just spoiled for choice in terms of which direction do we go. I think we need more people on the strategic thinking and resource mobilization side to be able to pursue these different lines of pursuit. In the economic diplomacy space alone, there are probably 3 pipeline projects that are in the offing, including one that is an expression of interest from Irish aid project to continue that work strand and things like that. So I think what we find as probably a constraint is just the in-house human resource pool to be able to do this. So which is why I'm saying it's probably would be good to have more hands on deck to be able to do this sort of strategic thinking and resource mobilization for Cypar. But really, I'm personally very upbeat. We have pulled it off. We have the capacity. We have the systems now inbuilt. Of course, some of the systems are still undergoing refinement and things like that, but we have the systems. We have our sight on the full range or complement of systems that we need to have in Cypar. And pretty much all of them are there, from the governance systems around board charters, strategic plans and things like that, all the way into the technical aspects of having a management in place, having financial systems, automated or digitized, having procurement systems, comms, and so on. So incrementally, we are building on the systems, but we have them. And that's important for any organization, and even to build confidence. Right now, with the way we have restructured ourselves as a not-for-profit organization that is still registered with ACRA, so we have the best of both worlds. We are a formal establishment, formally registered. We are paying taxes. We paid quite a lot of taxes under the ZDG Project, by the way. And we were a very responsible citizen. I think it was upwards of 3 million kwacha that we paid from the consultancy fees that we were extending to the consultants. We created quite a lot of employment. So it was temporary, but if you look at the number of contracts that were issued, there were probably 30, 40 contracts under ZDG alone. So responsible, again, socially in that respect, that we created employment. We built a lot of capacity for Cypar, because Cypar's takings in terms of institutional fees was probably around 5 million kwacha. And this is money that Cypar can reinvest in itself now to build these systems, to build its talent pool, to sustain support staff and things like that. So all in all, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned about from the ZDG project about how to really get value for money. And I think once we get to the conversation with Ford Foundation and other stakeholders, they'll be quite proud of the work that we have done. Maybe as proud as we are with what we have achieved here. But yeah, we are upbeat that now sky is the limit. We can vie for bigger grants, bigger funding, maybe more sustainable, stable funding that would maybe run 3-5 years, as opposed to these short-term grants that run for 1 year and can put you under significant pressure.
Okay, thank you very much. As we wrap up, do you have any final remarks that you'd want to share on the ZDG project and Cypar, your personal takeaways from all of the work that you've done here?
Not much. I mean, I think if there was anything I would add is I love the way Cypar is bringing in young people and using them as a sort of next wave. I hope many of them can grow with the institution the way I have, for example. I was relatively younger when we started 20 years ago. We started in the Department of Economics, right? Borrowing the resource room, which was their meeting room, to do the Cypar work. Once Cypar was, and the first project we did was the Zambia Social Sciences Journal with Professor Momba, Professor Ndulo, and Maya, and others. And we would sit in that room with Faye, and would share ideas about other strands that we could create. But the first thing was ZSSJ. And then it was not reliable to stay at the economics department because that was really a freebie that we were being given. And we said, let's be responsible, find the resources where we can rent. And we went and started renting in Kabulonga, what is now 4 on Bishop, right across from Central Mall. But that time it was just small offices there for one of the churches. And then we eventually started this building project, eventually actualized enough money to actually self-finance the building of Cypar Institute. And today, 20 years later, here we are, right? It required quite a bit of pro bono investment of time and talent and growing with the institution to actualize the vision. But it required that as a young person, I bought into the vision of the Ndulo brothers when they were bringing me on board. We have a number of others that have grown with the institution, like Maya, like Dale, and many others. But I would encourage young people to, understand what the vision is and figure out if they're going to. Sometimes it takes short-term sacrifices, right, to grow with an institution, because you have your family and social dynamics to take care of on a daily basis. And other than through projects, you might find that Cypar does not have the ability to pay you on a regular salary basis. And for many people, projects are nerve-wracking. They're not as stable. You're talking about maybe 6 months to a year at most having a contract. That's not as stable as having a, say, 3-year, 5-year contract or a permanent job in an institution in government. So it can be a bit unnerving, but looking at the way the institution is growing, I think it's a solid bet to put your money on. So I would encourage young people to really figure out how to grow with the institution, and because the space is there to grow with the institution. Yeah.
20 years you've been with Cypar for? Over 20 years? 20 years?
20 years.
20 years.
20 years next year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we were established in 2006.
And you're still here. And you will be here. Why?
God willing, I will be here for a lot longer. Why? I think my journey with Cypar is very personal. I found a significant mentor in Professor Ndulo. He organized my scholarships to go to study abroad. And I think he's a great visionary leader. And I bought into his vision before Cypar was established, while I was a student. I was very impressed with, he was a silent mentor when I was a student at undergrad. And he didn't know that I was following the way he conducts himself, the way he dresses. I'm sure you can see we both don't tuck in, So I took that more or less as a lifestyle for myself. And I knew that if as a mentor, he could make it work for himself, I could make it work for myself as well, for my own personal career, but also for the greater good of society. So once I came back from my master's, which, like I was saying, he organized for me. Initially, I was supposed to go to South Africa. That fell through. But he was the one pushing all the strings for South Africa. When he fell through, he said, I'm not giving up. But he's that kind of person. And in my intake alone, he organized 8 scholarships for people who had the right grades to go abroad. I was one of them. I was one of the blind that was made to see that, then came back and stayed with him. So when I came back, I interned with him on a pro bono basis, just under his wing, so that I could continue learning how to do research, how to do trade analysis and things like this. He's a trade economist pretty much, and industrial development economist. And I am that too. And it was that mentorship and that life coaching that I got from him that got me to stay. He opened himself up to me. So I was happy to grow with him, to grow with his institution as his understudy and things like this. And it also made it easy because Cypar, knowing that they couldn't fully compensate me, were very flexible around how I shared my time between Cypar and other activities that I did. So I became a consultant. I worked with the university, like I was saying. I worked with a think tank called ZIPAR. And I worked with COMESA, the regional organization. In all these, it was relatively short to medium-term contracts because I wanted to keep that flexibility so that I could have at least one foot in Cypar throughout. So I found a formula for making it work to take care of my social dynamics side of things, my bread and butter, but also to keep one foot that was firmly planted in the vision that Professor Ndulwa had for Cypar. So it took a little bit of sacrifice here and there, but it takes also some level of thoughtfulness and faith. Just trust that it will pan out the way the vision is being foreseen. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Caesar, for your time, and thank you very much for sharing about SAIPAR and the ZDG project. Thank you to our listeners for joining us in today's discussion. Follow us on our socials to continue this conversation. On X, you can find us at Southern_Policy, Facebook and LinkedIn, Southern African Institute for Policy and Research. And join us in the next one as we continue to discuss people, policy, and progress.